Hello, I think we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Managing Exam Anxiety. Some of you might know who we are. You might have seen our faces before. Some of you might have no idea, but I am Jenny F. and I work for Uscape. And Uscape runs two projects called Illumina and Headstrong, who are hosting tonight. Illumina is our online support work for teenagers struggling with self-harm, which Jenny and I manage. Jenny is the other person you can see, also called Jenny. And Headstrong is another online project we run. We're there on social media supporting young people with all things to do with their mental and emotional well-being. And we are going to be hosting tonight. I'm a counsellor. I'm nearly fully trained as a psychotherapist and art therapist as well. And I live in Devon, and my new favourite thing is swimming in the sea. And yeah, I'm Jenny F.
Hello, I'm Jenny C. We thought it would be easier if we both had the same name, but then we actually do, so it's much easier. It's fabulous. And it is so good being with you here thinking about exam anxiety. I work with Jenny at running the Illumina project. When I'm not doing that, I'm trained to be a psychotherapist, but I've spent a lot of the last 10 years working in secondary schools and high schools. So doing kind of pastoral work and especially helping students manage anxiety around exams. Yeah, I'm even getting anxious saying the word anxiety about exams. And we know that for so many of you, this is like a massive week. But we're kind of really noticing as well, lots of people just haven't had the experiences of sitting exams a lot in the past. It's one of the really good things that COVID took away for a lot of people. But also it might mean that you're feeling much more anxious than you're expecting that you would do, kind of coming into GCSEs and A-levels over the next few weeks. So we want to kind of congratulate you on coming in this evening. It's a really brave decision. And we really hope that this is a space that is going to be helpful for you. We'll have a bit of time at the end also where you can ask us some questions. And we'll be thinking all about kind of what is anxiety? Why do we especially feel it around exams? But also what are the practical things that we can do. And I wonder, Jenny, do you remember getting anxious about exams when you were doing them?
I do. Do you know, one of the things that came back to me when I was thinking about this was just thinking about the whole before the exam, like, turning up, I don't know, 20 minutes or half an hour before the exam, and everyone is anxious. And even if you're feeling all right, the kind of group hysteria or the anxiety of other people who've revised things you haven't, or yeah, all of that, it just feels like you kind of step into this group anxiety, which can make things worse. Yeah. How about you?
Definitely. I remember doing the spectacular thing of revising for the wrong papers. So my very first paper was something like a history paper, and I revised technology. And it was only on the morning of my exam when I was talking to other people, and they were all saying it's the history paper, and I was just like, no, you've all got it wrong, because I quite like being right. And it turned out that they were definitely right, and I had to just flag this history paper. I remember that very
We
clearly.
do not wish that on any of you, and we're not trying to raise your anxiety. I tell you what, let's crack on. Let's start to talk about what is anxiety. What is the difference between being a little bit nervous, saying I'm anxious? The thing is, both of those things, they're just words, and both of those we use in different ways. So one person's I'm nervous might actually mean that they're having a massive kind of struggle inside. Another person's I'm anxious might mean they just have butterflies in their tummy, or they are struggling to get out of their room and leave the house. So it's really hard to give concrete definitions. And then throw in that as well, that you can now have a mental health diagnosis where anxiety is now like an official thing that a doctor can tell you that you are. And it can feel quite hard to make sense of what's normal, what's not normal, when should I be worried about my anxiety. And so we kind of want to demystify this as much as we can tonight. Anxiety is a thing that we all have, and it's really important that we have it. We all need anxiety. I felt waves of anxiety today when I was going to cross the road and a car suddenly, came along faster than I was expecting. And what happens is you feel something in your body change. It's not just something that happens, in your brain. You actually physically feel different, like this thing floods your body, because anxiety is, you might have heard it said before, is kind of like our brain's fire alarm. It tells us there's something wrong, tells us something we maybe should be worried about. It basically tells us you need to pay attention right now. So we all need that. And we probably need that a little bit for exams as well, because exams are something that we should pay some attention to, that we should try and engage our brains. But of course, sometimes those experiences of anxiety come really kind of thick and fast, and they maybe overwhelm us, they maybe paralyze us, they maybe make us feel like we can't keep going, we can't even do the thing that they're trying to tell us to pay attention to. Well, wherever you are on the scale of, just feeling a little bit of excitement, maybe a surge of adrenaline about doing an exam, maybe something that feels harder to manage, maybe something that makes you worried you're not going to be able to do the exam, or you're not going to be able to write something in the room. Wherever you are, there are things that we can do to help ourselves, things that we know are tried and tested, which can help you. And we want to give you loads of those ideas this evening. I guess wherever you are with your anxiety, whatever shape, whatever size, however big a deal it is in your life, we think there are things that we can share that are gonna help, that are gonna meet you where you are.
And I don't know about you, but I often get kind of a really strong reaction in my body if I'm feeling anxious. And I'm somebody where like my legs start shaking and I go really quiet. And other people can usually tell if I'm feeling a bit anxious because I'm genuinely quite chatty. But it's just like I have to spend so long overthinking things in my head in that moment and playing out all the possibilities that I go really quiet. And sometimes I'll notice that maybe I've got the butterfly feeling in my tummy, or feels like my heart starts racing, all of these kind of things. And we have some really common experiences in our bodies that we have, but as some of those especially, we can almost feel, I'm anxious, this is going to happen when an exam happens. And that might be things like feeling really sick, or feeling like my hands are shaking, or I can't concentrate. And so some of the activities and things we're going to suggest are things to especially manage those moments when you have that really bodily reaction to the anxiety. And what happens in our brain when it perceives that there's a threat for us is it produces two different hormones. So adrenaline and cortisol. Cortisol is like our stress hormone. And adrenaline's the one that gives us sort of the energy and the power to be able to get away from the threat. And that works really well if the threat is sort of a lion or something that we need to run away from or fight. But that doesn't work if it's things like exams that are making us anxious. And in fact, it can kind of happen that almost the switch in our brain just keeps producing more and more of these hormones. And then we get more and more anxious. It's like a kind of a chronic anxiety. And people sometimes especially experience that if they've had lots of situations in their lives that have made them anxious, or there's something really big going on that's making us feel anxious. And especially around things like exams, you might notice that your hands or your arms or your legs start shaking a bit more than they might do usually, or your breathing changes. And all these different things that are going on in your body are your body's reaction to what it's perceived as this stress. So we have to work really hard at grounding ourselves. And grounding ourselves is the way of kind of switching that switch off and bringing back in the thinking part of our brain. And there are some different activities that we can do, which we're going to bring up on the next slide to show you about grounding. Because grounding, at its really simple part, keeps us present. I don't know if this happens to you, Jenny, but sometimes when I feel anxious, my mind starts kind of whirling off everywhere. Do you get that kind of feeling?
I do. And do you know, the thing that helps me is actually wiggling my toes. That's like a really weird one. Wiggling my toes is the thing that like brings me back into my body.
Yeah, so just doing something really simple that nobody else knows that you're doing is that way of going, my mind's going off, but I can bring it back and I can come back into the moment. So definitely wiggling your toes. I really like those kind of wiggly plastic hair bands that are really stretchy. And so I think having something like that can be really helpful just to twist, to bring you back.
Are you allowed those in exams?
I don't know. I guess.
You guys probably know better than we do.
Yeah, a hairband of some kind is probably okay. If in your school or your college hairbands are okay, then that's great. Maybe an elastic band, I don't know. But having something physical, either squeezing your fingers, squeezing your toes, something that can keep you in that moment is a really, really helpful thing, because it then starts to bring down our stress hormones. It helps us to come back into ourselves. You can also do things like just rubbing your arms and your legs. You might want to stamp your feet, squeeze your toes, rub your fingers together. And there's other things as well, like this, that you might have heard of. And it's about naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And there's no order to those. You don't have to remember to do it in that order, but don't start with 5 things you can taste, because you're setting yourself up for failure. It's just not going to work. So start with something easy, like 5 things you can see or touch. And that's something that you can do during an exam. If you notice that your heart is starting to race and you kind of go, I'm losing being able to concentrate, that's a really helpful one. Nobody knows that you're doing it, but it can be something that brings you back into your body. One of the other things I find really helpful is just naming the colours of things around me, which sounds a bit odd to say it out loud, but it just connects me back with where I am in the present rather than where my mind has taken me to. So it can be really helpful to do things like, okay, the walls are white, my shoes are black, my pen is blue, the paper's white, all of these kind of things. And that just brings you into that moment. And I think that can be something that's really helpful to go, okay, I'm acknowledging that I need this and I'm coming back in.
It's hard, isn't it? Because when you're in an exam, you are actually kind of reaching for like knowledge, for things you remember, for kind of abstract stuff. And it can maybe feel a bit scary to think, I need to stop for a minute, because there's another part of your brain going, don't stop, whatever you do, don't stop. But actually just taking 2 minutes in the middle of an exam to just come back into the here and now and into the room, noticing the colours, things like that, is really going to help you to kind of just calm and slow down and help your brain work a bit better. So so what about exams specifically? What is it that is particularly stressful about exams? I mean, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? Like exams just bring up stress and anxiety. I think everyone associates exams with anxiety and stress, and in fact they're meant to. The whole thing is, it's kind of supposed to be a test where you get a bit of adrenaline going and you are trying to have to like give of your best and write your best answers. But we also know that that doesn't work for loads of us. That's like a terrible situation for a lot of us. We don't do our best. We don't manage to give our best answers and remember all our best stuff. We just kind of have to get through the exams in some way. But I think it's a really important question for us to stop and think about why we particularly get stressed about exams, because actually I think it's different for all of us. There'll probably be some overlap, but to think, what specifically is it about exams that worries me or scares me? Is it that we really want to do well and we are afraid that we won't? Is it that we're experiencing pressure from others, maybe from parents, maybe from teachers, and we're scared of the consequences of doing badly, like how they will react, how our teachers will be, or how our parents will be, and how that will make us feel? Maybe there are really big consequences for your exams, you feel, maybe about getting into a course or being able to do something else next year, and you're aware that it matters how you do for what you might be allowed to do next year. Some of us, and I know I definitely relate to this, really feel like our self-esteem and our worth is tied to how we do in exams. Maybe especially if you're someone who generally does well in them, people expect you to do well. The idea of not doing well can actually feel really terrifying and really overwhelming. Like, who am I and who would I be and what would that mean and how would I feel about myself if I didn't do well in exams? But then I also mentioned earlier that there's kind of more than just maybe our specific anxiety. Other people's anxiety affects us, and maybe you know that you pick it up from your friends. Maybe you have the same experience of sitting in the hall before an exam and just kind of like almost inhaling everybody else's anxiety and what they think they haven't revised or they've forgotten. And it can feel very hard to go into an exam feeling okay when you're in a room full of people who feel really stressed and anxious themselves. And then I guess there's one more thing that it might be, is that sometimes when we start to feel anxious about something, it almost reminds our body and brain of something else that we feel anxious about. So we end up kind of bringing in this anxiety almost like in the back door, which is nothing to do with exams. It's actually to do with other things from our lives or previous things that have happened to us. But almost that anxiety just joins the party. And then we end up with this overwhelming experience of anxiety, which is kind of just way bigger than these actual exams. So I think there's an important challenge for us going into these exams to just honestly ask yourself, what is the thing that I am afraid of? What is the thing that I am afraid of that's causing this anxiety, that's specifically about this situation? Because identifying that can really help us to then think about that, like, what would it be like? Would it be that scary? How might I get through that? Well, maybe it wouldn't be the end of the world if this exam doesn't go so well. And we start to be able to use our brains, the slightly more rational part of our brains, to think ourselves through and realize that we'll be okay and that there will be a way through. And even if this exam goes really badly, we'll still be okay on the other side, and we'll still have our friends, and we'll still have, our life in most ways will be unchanged. But it can feel very hard to do that clear thinking when we're in that emotional place of, I'm just terrified. So this is maybe something that's possible to do when you're not in the thick of it. When you're maybe kind of approaching, maybe you've got a little bit of time before the exam to just think, what is it for me that I'm specifically afraid of? Can I name that? Can I work out what that is and how realistic a fear it is, and if I'll be okay if that would happen? I think that's an important part of the puzzle, as well as then the things that we can do when we are physically overwhelmed and less able to do that clear thinking.
I can see that Alex has asked, what do you do when your head goes blank? And I think that's such a common experience that happens in exams. I definitely remember having that in a lot of my exams. And I think, just as Jenny said about kind of when we can name our fears, that's also another one that we can name in that moment. We can go, oh, my mind's gone blank. I'm not really sure about that at the moment. Especially if you notice that you're somebody who would naturally go, oh my goodness, this is terrible, what's going to happen? And then get anxious about the idea your mind's gone blank. But instead slowing things down and going, okay, that's happened. Maybe I'll have a look at some of the other questions. I'll just cut myself some slack just for a couple of minutes and go, all right, I'll have a look through what else it is what other questions there are, where else it is that I can remember. Just pause for a moment. And I think especially not looking at other people, because if you start seeing everybody else writing and your mind's gone blank, it brings back that, oh my goodness, what if I'm not good enough type fears. Yeah. Whereas the more it is that you're able to do, okay, my mind's gone blank and that's a normal thing to happen in exams, and that happens. But I know that I can still keep going and I know that I can get through this. I think that can really help us stay focused. It's another one, a little bit like a grounding activity, isn't it?
Yeah. Actually, a young person I work with said to me this week, she had an experience of doing an exam and she absolutely was paralyzed by like the first one or two questions. Mine went completely blank. But then she went on and did the others. And then by the end, she came back and she could do them. So, don't panic if your mind goes blank. We know that's easier said than done. But, you can find your way back. I love this. Wayne has said that one of the things he shares in schools is to give of your best, achieve your potential. Your value can never be judged on a set of exam results. That's so true, Wayne. And I think that can be hard for us to believe when we're not good at exams, but also maybe when we are really good at exams. There's almost a kind of terror of like, what happens when I finally fail one or finally do badly? But absolutely. And I guess that connects a little bit to what Mary says. She's not so worried about sitting the exam as such, but is worried that her best won't be good enough and the grades won't be enough. And that can really easily convert into us feeling like we are not good enough, which just isn't true. You know, exams are like one really specific way of assessing, you know, what we've learned or what we're good at, but they don't define who we are. And there's just no way that an exam has the power, I don't think, or should have the authority to tell us in any way that we're not good enough. As a human being, as a student, you know, we'll find our path and we'll find our way through and we'll find a way to do the thing that we are shaped and made for, I believe. But yeah, in this season, it can really feel hard not to feel judged by them. Yeah.
I definitely remember I wanted to do medicine, I wanted to be a doctor, and was kind of like, that's what everybody has said I was going to do. And spectacularly did not do well enough in my GCSEs to get in to do science A levels. I got 8% in my physics GCSE, which I feel was like quite an achievement. It was basically writing my name and probably getting some tick boxes right. I have no idea. But I look at my life now and I really wouldn't want that have been to be my path. But because I didn't get the right GCSE grades to do the A levels I'd planned, I ended up doing really different things. I ended up moving to different places, living in other countries, all of these kind of things. And so now I can look back with the hindsight of actually it was all okay. And at the moment, it definitely felt quite frightening to go, well, I thought I was on this path and now I'm on this path. But looking back now, I can see that that was the really brilliant things have come out of it. And it wasn't always easy, but I definitely feel less anxious now as an adult when things aren't going the way I'm expecting, because I had that kind of experience of managing that.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a chat about breathing. And I imagine, because we're all human, at some point you felt overwhelmed or anxious or upset, and somebody has said to you, oh, just breathe. Just take a deep breath. You'll be fine. And I know just how frustrating that can be in that moment, can't it? Because you're like, well, obviously I'm breathing. And also like, that's not helpful. But there are a lot of links, realistically, about just how important breathing is as a way of grounding us. And one of the really important things is because when we're anxious, we tend to breathe just out the very top of our lungs. And so our breathing is much more sort of shallow and we just don't take in enough oxygen. And so then the rest of our body can begin to go, oh, I'm not getting enough oxygen. This isn't okay. Must breathe faster. And it creates much more of a cycle. Whereas controlling our breathing, taking deeper breaths from the bottom of our lungs, then helps, just as we've got here, our heart rate to slow down so that then we go, okay, all right, I'm less panicked, I've got less adrenaline. It means our muscles also are less tense. And it's sometimes the tenseness in our muscles that can cause them to start shaking when we're anxious as well. It can also make us feel less stressed because our blood pressure drops and we can feel calmer generally because our body is going, this is an okay time for me. And there's lots of different breathing techniques, and some of them will work really well in the moment of exams, and some might be things that you have to practice outside before you go into the room. And I know Mary said that she thinks it is possible to take a hairband in, so maybe having something like that as something to ground you is a really helpful thing. But one of my favourite breathing techniques is called square breathing, which is where you just kind of draw a square. You can draw around a piece of paper with your finger or a desk, and you breathe in as you go up. I'm going to do it a little bit smaller. In as you go up one side, hold your breath, breathe out, and then breathe in, hold your breath, breathe out. And just keep going around in a bit of a square. You can do a triangle. It doesn't really matter what shape you are doing. But generally, we've got square things on our desks if we're doing exams, or a rectangle. So that one makes it a bit easier. And anything like that just slows down our breathing because we're doing it in a concentrated way. And we're really focusing on our breathing. And especially the holding our breath means that we then have to take breath from our lower lungs, from the deeper part, and that can make a really big difference. Some people also imagine tracing around their fingers and breathing in and out on each finger. And that can be a really helpful thing as well. There's also people kind of say beforehand, if you can sing, if you can move around a little bit, anything like that, because again, it's focusing on getting your breath coming from the bottom of your lungs. And if any of you are singers or musicians, you'll know that you have to focus on breathing differently in that way. And so anything that kind of moves your body and focuses on your breathing is really important. You might also want to put in plans of things post-exam too, whether that's things like I'm going to go for a run or walk the dog or go and play football for a little while, anything like that, that is then bringing your breathing back to its regular rhythm as well. I think that anything that you can do in those moments helps you to feel a little bit calmer as well. Are there any other breathing things that you know, Jenny, that are like, yes, that's the one that I go for?
No, do you know, but I feel calmer having listened to you talk about breathing. I feel like my breathing has slowed and I feel like that's just calmed me down. Yeah, so I know from working with loads of young people that when they're most anxious, breathing can feel like the most impossible thing to focus on. And you says, I've had loads of young people tell me breathing doesn't work for me. And I think, you know, we sometimes talk about this. Sometimes when we're told to maybe do some of these breathing things, focus on our breathing, slow it down, those kinds of things, we tend to do it for like 30 seconds and then be like, it hasn't worked. It's nothing has changed. And we just need to stick with it a bit longer. Because honestly, like doing that for actually like 2 or 3 minutes, it can't help but affect our bodies. Like from scanning brains, from scanning bodies, from all the amazing things that we can now do through MRI, imaging, we can see what that does to our bodies. We can see what it does to our brains, and it does absolutely help us, help regulate. And regulate's a word I love to use. It just means bringing ourselves back to a kind of feeling okay place again. So when we are anxious, we're kind of a little bit overstimulated, and we need to find ways to just bring ourselves back to center, back to a place of kind of calmness and being able to think. And breathing really is the kind of magic ingredient to that, being able to slow that and focus that. So I feel like we should have something a little bit more exciting and, you know, original, but honestly, like breathing really is big.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a neuroscientist, so she studies things that do with our brain, and she did a big study as well into what made a difference in people on her course sitting exams. And the biggest thing, regardless of whether how much revision people had done or how confident they felt, the biggest thing was whether they could see a tree around on the same day as their exams.
Wow.
And so there's all kinds of stuff about how, and this is the bizarre links, that our brains know how much we need nature, and we feel calmer when there is nature. And so even if you can't see a tree from the room where your exam is, if there's some you can see in the rest of the day, it slows down all of your body in the same way that breathing does in that moment as well. So that's why we say kind of if you can go for a walk or something, or if your school or your college has trees that you can see at break times or lunch times or afterwards, again, it kind of slows down your body as well. It's just amazing to think.
That is amazing. I love that as well. Like you guys can go now into your rooms where you're going to do your exams, and the first thing you do, look and see if there's a window that you can see a tree out of. And you know, if you can, just know that that is a point on your side.
Or even just like on the bus in the way in, if you see some trees there, you know, just kind of like go, oh yeah, okay, there's trees there, and my body, I don't even know how, becomes calmer when there's trees there.
Amazing. Love that. Okay, well, what about when it feels unmanageable? Like these are all really lovely ideas, but what about when we get into the place where we literally are just really struggling to cope? We don't know if we're going to manage to get through it. It feels really overwhelming. What do we do then? Well, this is often exacerbated by the fact that perhaps we can manage on normal day, normal situation. But when we're doing exams, we're really on someone else's schedule. We have to sit in the room where someone else says, I know we have to do this a bit at school anyway, but it feels like a particularly intense experience of having to do things that you don't want to do and on somebody else's schedule and with really strict rules. And that can exacerbate our anxiety and our stress level as well. So just to say, like, that can take it up a notch in a way which is outside of our control. So when I want to say something just briefly about anxiety attacks and panic attacks, which may be things that some of you have experienced. They are very similar. Panic attacks tend to go on for longer than anxiety attacks, but really what's happening in both of those things is that our bodies are becoming overwhelmed by those signals our brain is sending off about there being something really terrifying happening. The kind of cortisol and the adrenaline, those things are really flooding our system, and it can feel absolutely terrifying. I mean, any of you who've had a panic attack will know that you can feel like you wonder if you're going to die. Like, it can feel that scary, that hard to breathe. You don't know what it is, the pain, it can feel absolutely awful. And so for any of you who've had that experience or are worried that you're going to have that experience, we get what that is like and how awful and overwhelming it is. And I guess something to say is that, asking for help in that moment is just really crucial. And I get that there'll be some teachers who get it and some who don't, and that can also up the stress as well. But being able to communicate somehow, even if it's a friend who knows, who can, communicate on your behalf, if you're unable to communicate, is going to be really important. If it's something that you're worried about, flagging that up so that someone in school or someone who's going to be around the exam knows that that's a possibility that you are worried about and knows what to do that will help when that happens, is going to be really important. And I guess if you feel that you're getting to that point where you're not sure you're going to be able to keep functioning, where it feels like the anxiety is really taking over, then 3 things I think are the most important. And you know where I'm going to start, don't you? Breathing. Stop and focus on your breathing. And it can often feel like you literally can't breathe when you're having a panic attack. Your chest feels tight and you feel like you can't, but you can. Even if all you can do is take in the smallest breath and do like the most shallow breathing that feels really unnatural, still do that. Because focusing in on something that's happening here in your body now, rather than something that's happening in your imagination or out there, is going to help your body to start to regulate and to let go of some of the things that it's panicking about. Panic attacks can sometimes feel like they come from nowhere. They don't. They do come from somewhere. There will always be some kind of trigger, and we might know what it is, we might not know what it is. But there's something that our brain is recognizing that is making us feel under threat and afraid, and kind of sends us into that hyper survival mode. So just slowing down, focusing on your breathing. Talk to yourself. Now, I know you can't do this out loud in an exam situation, but being able to talk to yourself, maybe you can go back to some of that thinking that you did about what is it that I'm afraid of? And you can talk yourself through it. I'm going to get through this exam. I'm going to survive this exam. Nothing that happens in this exam is going to change anything important about my life. This will be over in an hour's time. I'm going to go home and I'm going to see my friend. I'm going to see my dad. I'm going to have pizza for tea. Things that just reassure you of like the reality of your life. There might be a mantra even, or just something that really helps you, like, this is just my anxiety. This is my anxiety. It's not going to last forever. These feelings are going to pass. I'm going to get through them. I'm going to feel okay again in a while. Whatever it is that you need to say to just help remind yourself of what's going on and the fact that you are going to get through it. And then the other thing is something we've already talked about as well. It's grounding, is looking for anything that just brings you back into the room, that brings you away from all the places that your brain has gone to, either that you're aware of or you haven't even managed to follow, that brings you back to paper on the desk, the pencil, squeezing your fingers, wiggling your toes. Those things are all things that are just going to bring you back, calm you down, and enable you to start to think again about what happens next and what you need to do.
And I love how you kind of talked about, Jenny, there about what happens if you have an anxiety attack in those kind of moments. And I can hear people putting in the comments as well, like, this is a really big fear. And I think for me, the first step is to go, actually, I'm going to tell somebody beforehand. Before I go into these exams, I'm going to tell somebody else at school or college, university, I'm going to say, actually, I'm really anxious about these exams. And I'm anxious that I'm going to have a panic attack or an anxiety attack. And this is what I need to happen if this happens. So you can even go into it going, I've got these strategies, but I just need to know if this happens, can I leave by a certain door? Do I need to put my hand up? Just so that then you're not anxious about what happens in my school if this happens. Because different places will have different rules. But I know that I feel much less anxious about a situation if I've got the facts beforehand. It doesn't mean that I can control the situation, but it means that I go, if this happens, I now know how to manage this. And I think especially as well, if you are kind of going, actually, I'm really anxious about managing my revision at the moment, about just coming into school when there's exams, anything like that, the first and the most important thing is to talk to somebody about it. And if you've had experiences in the past where someone said, oh, don't worry about that, you'll be fine, maybe they're not the right person. There are other people. If you have somebody that someone says, oh, always go and talk to Mr. Partridge, and you're like, but it doesn't work. It's totally okay to go, I need to go and talk to somebody else. And that's all right. One of the most helpful things, though, is to go, actually, in me talking to this person, this is what I need. Do I need them to reassure me? Do I need them to give me steps to manage it? Do I need them to make some kind of a change? Do they have the power to make that kind of change? All of those kind of things. Because then you're almost helping them out by saying, this is the information that I need from you as well. So definitely, wherever it is that the exams are, talking to somebody there and going, I need you to know this about me beforehand, or I need you to help me with this so that then I can do as well as I can in these spaces. There's also some really good information on a website called Young Minds, and they have lots of ideas around managing anxiety, but also how to have conversations with people about it as well. I know there's different content that we've put out on the Headstrong site too. So if you want to learn more about how to manage when I feel anxious, then that's a really helpful space too. And there are a few different organisations that might offer you kind of the coaching skills or a little bit of space to have some counselling around how can I manage the feelings of I'm disappointing somebody else. And organisations like Kooth and Stop, Breathe, Think are really helpful places where you can go and just have a few weeks of talking to somebody online about how do I manage these feelings when they come up. And that might be something that you want to put in place for the future. But especially if you notice I need some help at the moment, it's about, okay, who are the people that can help me with this? You might also want to have some kind of a plan with friends. If you know that you or one of your friends are really struggling, it might be that you kind of go, actually, we're going to have a routine that we get breakfast together or anything like that. So that's an option as well.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, that's kind of taking us into our final slide. So I can see there's a couple of questions we haven't got to yet, and this is a good moment if you want to throw in any final questions that we'll get to in a few minutes. But yeah, helping our friends is often helping us as well, because it's kind of about how do we shape a culture in our friendship group which supports all of us. You know, you might feel like, oh, I feel really stressed when I'm around my friends because they're all stressing. Or you might be aware that actually some of your friends are really struggling more than you. Like, you know, whatever our friends are going through, like the stuff that we can do that will help both us and them to stay calmer and to get through this season without becoming overwhelmed. And some of those things are, I guess, noticing that thing that I said before about how anxiety spreads. Like, think about your friendship group. Does anxiety spread through your friends when there's an exam going? When you guys meet before an exam, do you tend to like ramp up each other's anxiety, or do you manage to calm each other? And just think about that, and think about, is there something that you could suggest that you do together that isn't like, have you revised this? What about this? Something that you can do together that feels like it just focuses you and doesn't make things worse before the exam, like suggesting something. I'm sure you guys can think of things that you might want to do to just help each other go into the exam in a calm place. Advocate for your friends as well, advocate for yourself. And by that I mean, like Jen was saying, like being able to say to a teacher like ahead of time, like, I feel really worried about whether I'm going to be able to do this exam, or what my anxiety is going to be like, or what I'll do if this happens in the exam, and talk it through and ask, like, what support, what should I do, who will be able to help me? And if you've got a friend who you know is struggling and isn't having those conversations, then help them to have that conversation, or go and have that conversation with the teacher on their behalf, so you can advocate so that everyone kind of has the best chance of support. There's no reason to make it as hard for everyone as it possibly can be. Like, let's look for ways to support ourselves and each other, and make the culture of exams in your school a bit healthier. I'm sure we can all contribute to that. Be encouraging to each other. I'm sure you guys do this anyway, but be encouraging. Don't do the whole like, oh, what did you put for this question? Try not to analyze after the exam, which is just going to leave someone feeling rubbish. It might make you feel better if you've written a good answer, or it might make you feel worse if someone's written a better answer. That kind of post-mortem doesn't usually help our anxiety. And build in times to celebrate with your friends, times to not do exams, times to celebrate and to do fun things, time to go for a walk in the park and not talk about exams. That's gonna really help you out. So I think it's it can feel so hard in this season when we're so stressed and so focused on our exams and our results, to kind of look around and take a breath and notice how everyone else is doing. But, in the big picture of life, the skills that allow us to take a breath and look around are going to be, I think, skills that help us just as much as any particular brilliance that we show in an exam. So let's grow some of those skills in this season, as well as, trying to do the best that we can do in the exam.
Definitely.
So we've got a couple of questions that I know have come up. I saw one about coffee and tea that I wanted to talk to. Ollie's asked, how much tea coffee is too much? Need it to feel awake, but don't want to make my anxiety worse. So yes, absolutely. Caffeine can exacerbate anxiety. So do not overdose. Like, don't do the Pro Plus or the super caffeine drinks if you possibly can. Like, you can't predict how they're going to affect you, but they do tend to ramp up anxiety. At the same time, don't suddenly go cold turkey if you're addicted to caffeine, because that will be, I can speak from experience, that will be horrible, and that will not help you in your exams. So like, don't make any major lifestyle changes, I would say, in the exams. But when it comes to things like caffeine, just try to not overdo it. Try to maybe kind of save it for when you're about to go and do your exam, rather than having 6 coffees before you even get to your 2 o'clock exam. Jen, do you want to
so Martin's asked about sleep and about kind of waking up at 5 a.m. and that kind of thing, and I think the biggest tip is having a routine. So the routine of, I go to bed at this time, I have a hot chocolate, I have a shower before going to bed, whatever those kind of things are, keeping that routine all the way through the exams. But also, if you notice that you're somebody that's waking up at 5 a.m. overthinking things, then try journaling at the same time. Try writing down, these are the things that are worrying me. If you need to, kind of get up, wander around, change things around, get back into bed. But try and avoid the, oh my goodness, I've got to fall asleep or this is going to happen. That kind of thing. Just as much as possible say, okay, I can do this, I can manage this.
Okay, we've got 25 seconds to go. We're going to hit the other ones. How do you calm down after adrenaline high for an exam? I mean, I would say go and have a run, go and swim, go and do something physical to literally get that adrenaline out of your system. It's a really good thing to do. And how do you help a friend get through stress without getting stressed yourself? I mean, if you can calm both of yourselves down, that's a really good thing. Use the breathing, use the grounding, use anything we've said, but try to, not go into the detail of the exam, but to focus on what's going to help and what's going to support you. I nearly did it. It's just over 45 minutes. Guys, that went so fast. Thank you
so much.
It's been so great to have so many of you with us. We really wish you loads of luck in your exams and that you come through it feeling good about life and good about yourselves.
Thank you for being with us. It's been really great to be able to share this with you, and we wish you all the best for your exams. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.